Picture a packed club. The lights are low, the bass is vibrating right through the soles of your shoes, and the DJ up in the booth is just flawlessly weaving one track into the
Oh,
next.
yeah, just that continuous hypnotic wave of energy.
Right. The crowd hasn't stopped moving for 2 hours. There are no breaks at all.
No silence, no stopping to tune an instrument.
Exactly. Now, I want you to take that exact same feeling, that unbroken, hyper-precise digital club experience, but replace the DJ with a group of humans sweating over acoustic guitars, a drum kit, and traditional hand percussion.
Which, on paper, sounds like a complete recipe for a disjointed mess.
It really does. But today, we are diving into a deeply researched 20-year retrospective from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR, to uncover how a band called Sound Tribe Sector 9, better known as STS9, basically did the impossible.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to really explore the evolution of this genre they helped pioneer called Livetronica.
And to find out exactly how this group bridged the massive gap between organic, messy live jam sessions and the relentless perfection of electronic dance music.
It's such a unique space to explore, honestly, because STS9 represents this fascinating 21st century experiment.
Right, they weren't just playing a new style.
Exactly. They are actively pushing the boundaries of what a live band can actually be, both functionally and structurally, in an era completely dominated by electronic sound.
So to really understand how they rewired live music, we have to rewind the clock back to the 1990s.
Back to Atlanta.
Yes, mid-90s Atlanta. We need to look at the very specific, almost impossible problem they were trying to solve.
Right, because you had this group of musicians coming together, and their backgrounds were just totally all over the map.
We are talking rock, jazz, funk, electronic, world music, and they sit down and basically ask themselves this incredibly ambitious founding question.
Can we create the vibe a DJ makes in a club, but entirely with live instruments?
Which is wild. And to do it, they made a really radical choice. Instead of focusing on melody, they decided to be a groove-first ensemble.
Yeah, relying heavily on the drum and percussion sections to drive the entire sound.
Okay, let's unpack this because I am trying to picture this practically.
Sure.
If you think about a traditional band, say a rock band, or even a typical jam band, what naturally happens during a show?
Well, you play a song, and then you stop.
Exactly. Maybe you do a sprawling 20-minute guitar solo, but eventually the song ends.
The drummer wipes his forehead, the guitarist tunes up.
The singer banters with the crowd, there is dead air. But a DJ, on the other hand, never stops.
The entire point of a DJ is this seamless transition.
Right. So how exactly do a bunch of guys with guitars and drums keep a dance floor moving without those inevitable biological human pauses?
It seems physically impossible, right?
Yeah, like what about sheer stamina? If you are playing a relentless breakbeat for 90 minutes straight, aren't your arms going to just physically give out?
You would certainly think so if they were playing like a traditional rock band. But what's fascinating here is that they circumvented human limitation by completely reimagining the role of the rhythm section. Well, they didn't just have one guy smashing a drum kit. They turned their percussionists into a living, breathing human drum machine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they drew heavily on Afrobeat and Latin percussion styles.
And for anyone unfamiliar, Afrobeat doesn't rely on a single heavy rock beat, right?
Right. It relies on interlocking, syncopated rhythms. You have multiple percussionists playing overlapping patterns.
So one player might take a micro break while the other sustains the underlying groove.
Exactly. Instead of a start and stop structure, you have this relentless, intricate, rhythmic lattice that just keeps chugging along.
That makes so much sense.
And because that percussion layer never drops out, it creates a continuous runway. It allowed the rest of the band, the bass, the guitars, the keys, to weave in and out of the mix.
Almost just like a DJ sliding the volume faders up and down on a mixer.
Spot on. The groove became the constant, and the melodies became the variables.
That is a wild way to play together. It's like they were acting as human gears in a larger machine.
It really is.
But of course, just playing continuously doesn't automatically make you sound like a sleek techno track.
No, definitely not.
Because they wanted to perfectly emulate this non-stop DJ experience, they quickly realized that a standard rock setup just wasn't going to cut it.
Right. Plugging a Fender Stratocaster into a vintage amplifier.
Yeah, that wasn't going to work. They had to fundamentally change not just their gear, but how they even conceptualized playing their instruments.
And you can actually hear them figuring this out in real time on their 1998 debut album, Interplanetary Escape Vehicle.
Which is a great title, by the way.
It is. And if you listen to that record, the raw ingredients are there. It has a very strong live, acoustic, almost post-rock and Afrobeat feel to it.
So they are playing their instruments traditionally, but trying to stretch those sounds into electronic shapes.
Yeah, but very quickly they realized they needed a huge technological leap.
Right, to become what we now call libtronica.
Exactly. They began pioneering that Livtronica genre alongside a few other forward-thinking bands of the era, like the Disco Biscuits and the New Deal. And to get that massive club-shaking electronic texture from acoustic and electric instruments, STS9 had to heavily utilize acoustic processing and effects.
They adopted what the MMR column calls a DIW thinking approach.
I want to pause on that term, DAW, for a second.
Sure.
For the non-audio engineers listening, DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. It's the software producers use on their laptops to make electronic music, programs like Ableton or Logic.
Right, where you can drag and drop audio blocks.
Yes, loop them infinitely, layer them, and apply crazy digital filters. STS9 started taking those digital computer screen concepts and applying them directly to their live playing on a physical stage.
Yeah.
So it's like they stopped treating their guitars and basses as traditional instruments and started treating them like video game controllers plugged into a massive, stage-wide synthesizer.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. It's like pressing the A button on a controller. Right, it triggers an event.
Pressing the button doesn't just make a mechanical click. It triggers an entire pre-programmed sequence of events in the game engine. Plucking the guitar string was just the trigger data.
So what the audience actually heard wasn't a vibrating piece of steel wire?
No, they heard a filtered, delayed, looping soundscape. The band used complex chains of sweeping filters and granular processing to mutate their sound.
Wait, granular processing, again, playing the role of the layman here. What does that actually mean in practice?
Okay, imagine taking a 1-second sound of a plucked guitar string and then digitally chopping it into 1,000 microscopic grains of audio.
Okay, 1,000 tiny shards of sound.
Right. Then you swirl those tiny shards around, overlapping them and stretching them out to create a massive atmospheric cloud of sound that sustains for minutes.
Wow.
That is granular synthesis. It takes a short acoustic input and explodes it into a massive ambient texture.
Okay, that paints a very vivid picture, shattering the sound and freezing the shards in midair. But if you are going to go through all that technical trouble to completely disguise the sound of the guitar, why not just use a synthesizer from the start?
That is the big question.
Yeah, why bother having the guitar on stage at all?
This raises an important point, and the answer is really the secret sauce of Livtronica. If you program a synthesizer, it hits the note with mathematical, robotic perfection every single time.
Right, zero variation.
But by using organic instruments processed through these massive digital effects, they captured the subtle, unpredictable human nuances.
Ah, so like the slight slide of a finger on a fretboard?
Yes, or how hard a pick strikes a string, the microscopic variations in timing that a human makes.
They took those human flaws and weaponized them with digital effects.
Precisely. This allowed them to layer heavily processed bass, guitar, and synths over that continuous Afrobeat percussion we talked about earlier.
Which gave them that incredible 3D stereophonic depth.
Yeah, it's that immersive sonic space, usually reserved exclusively for a DJ playing a finely tuned, heavily mastered electronic set.
But STS9 was building that 3D space from scratch in real time, right in front of the audience.
Exactly. And once they perfected this technological fusion of man and machine, it completely changed their trajectory.
It culminated in their defining studio masterpiece, which is a heavy label, but totally earned according to the MMR retrospective.
Oh, absolutely.
And the crazy thing is, making this masterpiece forced them to completely redesign how they approached their live concerts. So we hit the year 2005, and they release an album called Artifact.
A huge milestone for them.
The source is very clear on this. Artifact is the moment they fully abandoned whatever was left of the traditional jam band framework.
Gone were the wandering bluesy solos.
Right. They dove headfirst into ambient music, precise electronica, jazz, funk, and even early dubstep elements.
Artifact is widely considered a watershed moment for the Livtronica genre. It's dense, moody, and incredibly cinematic.
You have standout tracks on there like Atlas, Something, Arigato, and Peoples.
And especially Tokyo, which is the A2 track on the album, and it became this permanent, beloved fixture in their live shows.
Let me jump in really quick on A2 track for anyone who doesn't collect vinyl.
Oh, sure.
Back when records were the primary format, the A1 track was usually the big, catchy single designed to grab your attention immediately.
Right.
But the A2 track, the second song on the first side, was traditionally where the artist put the anchor of the album, the hidden gem, the deep groove that really set the thematic tone.
And Tokyo was exactly that for Artifact. The multi-layered synths, the programmed beats mixed seamlessly with heavy live percussion. It was a quantum leap from their late 90s sound.
But the immediate challenge was translation, right?
Huge challenge. How do you take an album that sounds like a meticulously crafted, studio-engineered electronic symphony and play it live to 10,000 people dancing in a field at a music festival?
And this leads to a massive evolution in their live shows. They couldn't just walk out and play a random list of songs anymore.
No, they started structuring their set lists to exactly mimic a DJ's narrative arc.
They had an opener designed to set the worldview and vibe for the night.
That was followed by a mid-set build-up that slowly raised the tension.
Then they would hit the floor, peak that moment of total arms in the air, dance floor euphoria.
After that, they would drop into a deep down-tempo section to let everyone catch their breath and get spacey.
Before finally ramping the energy back up for the encore.
It went way beyond the audio. They started treating their lighting rigs not just as visual flair, but as a massive stage device.
The lights were meticulously synced to the shifts in the music, completely unified with the sound.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to challenge the setup for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If you were a band born out of the live improvisation scene, and your set list is now structured rigidly to follow a specific DJ arc,
Right.
and your lighting cues are perfectly synced to exact beats, doesn't that entirely kill the spontaneous spirit they originally started with?
That is a very fair question.
Doesn't it just become a tightly scripted Broadway show?
That is the exact paradox they had to navigate. It seems completely counterintuitive because normally rigid structure kills spontaneity.
Exactly.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the absolute genius of their live design.
Okay, lay it on me.
By locking down the macro structure of the show, meaning the overall emotional arc of the set list, the synced lighting changes, it actually gave the musicians the ultimate freedom to improvise within the micro moments.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. How does being locked into a lighting cue give you freedom?
Let's look at a concrete example. Because the lighting director knows that a specific song is designed to reach its explosive peak exactly at the 4-minute mark, they can prep a massive visual explosion.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the bassist knows that exact same peak is coming. So for the 60 seconds leading up to it, that bassist doesn't have to worry about where the song is going.
Ah, they already know the destination.
Right. They have 60 seconds to completely mess around, manipulating a sub-bass filter, stretching a weird dominant note, pulling the rhythm back to build agonizing tension.
Knowing the framework of the show is going to catch them.
Exactly. They can push the improvisation right to the edge of chaos, confident that they will snap back to reality right as the lights go blinding white at minute 4.
Wow, that is incredible.
It was this perfect balance of rigid architecture and fluid interior design. And this is exactly what allowed them to play these legendary marathon late-night sets at major festivals.
Like Bonnaroo, Electric Forest, and Suwannee Halloween.
Yeah, they had the relentless stamina of a sequencer, but with the subtle, chaotic micro-timing that only human hands can produce.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The structure isn't a cage, it is a safety net that lets you do much crazier acrobatic tricks without fear of the whole song falling apart.
Well said.
And this highly immersive, emotionally curated live experience did something else too. It didn't just attract casual listeners who wanted to hear a 3-minute hit on the radio.
No, it forged an incredibly loyal traveling community.
People started following them from city to city. We have seen this cultural phenomenon before with bands like the Grateful Dead or Phish.
But STS9 was doing it with this entirely new, heavy electronic edge.
But when you build an ecosystem this massive, the foundation eventually gets tested. This community actually forced the band to evolve beyond just making music.
They realized very quickly that they weren't just a band playing gigs, they were the center of a cultural movement.
Right.
STS9 became pioneers of what we now call the community-based artist model. They didn't want to rely on the traditional music industry machine, so they launched their own independent record label, 1320 Records.
And this wasn't just a vanity project to release their own albums.
Not at all. They used it as a mechanism to support and elevate other artists who shared their unique musical philosophy.
How exactly did that work in practice? How did the label elevate others?
By cross-pollinating fan bases and sharing infrastructure, If STS9 had a massive tour, they would bring 1,320 records artists along.
Exposing them to thousands of guaranteed fans.
Exactly. They provided distribution, marketing, and a platform for artists who were also blending acoustic and electronic music, but didn't fit into the mainstream commercial radio boxes.
They were building a self-sustaining ecosystem.
And it went way beyond just the music business.
Yeah, they started heavily engaging in social activism. The source outlines how they actively supported education initiatives, environmental protection, and various local charities.
They weren't just tweeting about these things.
No, they were functionally putting their money where their mouth was, often directly donating portions of their ticket sales to these causes.
Right.
In 2008, they released a concept album called Peace Blaster. Now, looking at the MMR retrospective, it is clear the album was heavily focused on the specific political and environmental anxieties of the late 2000s.
Yeah, very themed around that era.
And regardless of where anyone stands politically on those specific issues, the overarching takeaway here is the mechanism of communication.
They were using their massive platform to speak directly to the real-world concerns of their community.
They were reflecting what their audience cared about, creating a feedback loop of shared values.
The music was the gathering point, but the shared values of the community became the glue.
But like any long-running community, things change, and the pressure of maintaining that ecosystem can be intense.
Definitely. In 2014, they faced a crisis that could have easily derailed them entirely.
Right, the lineup shift.
Yeah, a major lineup shift occurred when their longtime guitarist left the band, and Hunter Brown took the center.
This kind of disruption destroys a lot of bands.
It really does. But instead, it pushed them into a new era. They pivoted.
And this directly led to their 2016 album, The Universe Inside.
Which marked a distinct stylistic shift. It moved toward a clearer, more minimal structure, featuring heavier synth elements and noticeable modern EDM influences.
They adapted to the changing soundscape around them without losing their core identity.
And by 2019, they achieved what might be the ultimate community milestone for a live act.
They began hosting their entirely own music festival called Wavespell.
Just incredible.
So what does this all mean when you zoom out and look at the trajectory from mid-90s Atlanta to a massive festival in 2019?
They didn't just adapt to the 21st century music industry. No, they effectively seceded from it. By running their own label to fund their peers, funding their own charities to support their values, and literally building their own festivals where they control the entire environment.
They became their own autonomous world.
They built a universe and then invited you to come live in it for a weekend at a time.
I think that is the most profound takeaway from the MMR column. Their dedicated base of traveling fans proves that the band's focus on creating an autonomous community was just as innovative as their musical style.
Absolutely.
They engineered a new way to sound, blending analog and digital, yes, but they also engineered a new way to exist as a working artist.
They proved that if you provide a deep, authentic communal experience, both sonically and culturally, the audience will follow you anywhere.
They will follow you through massive genre shifts, through jarring lineup changes.
And quite literally across the country.
Yeah, it is an incredible journey.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to go back and synthesize the answers to those core questions STS9 posed in that rehearsal space over 20 years ago. Right. How close can a live band get to electronic music?
And conversely, how much organic groove can electronic music absorb?
The answer to both of those questions is Livetronica.
It is a genre that STS9 didn't just help invent, they mastered it. They proved that music isn't just a static product you consume on a streaming service.
It is an ongoing, real-time experience that is never truly finished in a recording studio.
It only comes alive when humans are sweating over their instruments, taking risks, and pushing digital boundaries in front of a live crowd.
It really highlights the magic of the human element. They spent decades using complex technology, trying to sound like precise machines.
But ironically, it was their humanity.
Exactly. The slight physical variations, the exhaustion, the visceral energy of a live show, that is what made the music so compelling in the first place.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Oh, I love these.
STS9 spent over 2 decades figuring out how humans can meticulously emulate and breathe life into electronic, machine-like structures. But now we're moving into an entirely new technological era. We live in a world where artificial intelligence can instantly generate a perfectly mastered, structurally flawless electronic beat in a matter of seconds.
It doesn't need to sweat. And it doesn't need to practice.
So, will the next evolution of Livetronica completely flip the script?
Mhm.
In the future, will we see live musicians attempting to organically jam alongside artificial intelligence in real time?
Wow.
If the machines can provide the perfect unbroken rhythm, will we actually be looking for the human mistake?
Like the slight drag of a tempo or a missed fret.
Exactly, the biological exhaustion just to find the groove and the soul inside the machines of tomorrow.
It is a fascinating frontier to consider. The tools will inevitably change, just as they did when STS9 first discovered the DIW.
Yeah.
But the search for that perfect, unbroken groove, the desire to connect deeply on a dance floor, remains exactly the same.
It really does. Because whether it is a DJ flawlessly fading a track or a group of musicians hooking an acoustic guitar up to a granular synth to create a wall of sound, we are all just looking for that continuous wave of energy to keep us moving.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep chasing the groove, and keep exploring the boundaries of the music you love.